ran as fast as he could, not even having time to turn back. It seems that Yeonwoo was already regretting his actions, but there was no turning back. He had to run away from the zombie monster. Soyeon watched what was happening. She saw her rescuer Yeonwoo appear on the floor, followed by a zombie monster. The girl could not believe what was happening. They seemed to be devouring the boy's body. Her knee was not only bruised, bleeding and hurt a lot. Meanwhile, the zombie monster just stood there and sniffed out its victims. Meanwhile, the boys were already going down to the second floor to see where the girls were. From the girls So-young and Hanmi. The monster stopped and analyzed what was happening. Yeonwoo ran screaming to the second floor, making more noise so that the zombie monster could hear and switch to the boy. And the young man succeeded, because the monster immediately noticed Yeonva. The zombie's attention was quite distracted, as it easily switched from one victim to another. So the girls didn't bother him anymore. The monster ran after the boy. Now Yeonwoo had to figure out where to run to keep himself and his classmates safe. The guy ran as fast as he could, not even having time to turn back. It seems that Yeonwoo was already regretting his actions, but there was no turning back. He had to run away from the zombie monster. Soyeon watched what was happening. She saw her rescuer Yeonwoo appear on the floor, followed by a zombie monster. The girl could not believe what was happening. She was about to say goodbye to her life when Yeonwoo appeared out of nowhere and saved her and Hanmi. At this time, the guy was running up the stairs, very professionally avoiding the white slime on the floor. Yeonwoo decided to turn back. He was very frightened by what he saw, which gave him the strength to run even faster, because dying was not in his plans. The monster was exactly half a floor behind him, but he was steadily catching up. It was not that slow. It was as if the boy's fear fueled it. He managed to turn back. The zombie monster was not as agile, which gave the guy a bit of a head start. When he got upstairs, he finally saw an open door. It was the exit. The boy made a circle and ran to the cable car, but from the other side. He had to quickly figure out how to escape and where to hide from the zombie monster. Yeonwoo decides to close the door behind him. He thought it would stop the monster for a while. The guy looks at the closed door and waits to see what will happen. Yeonwoo had a little time to recover. He thought that the zombie monster had stopped chasing him. The guy began to quietly descend the stairs at a calm pace, as if he hadn't just been chased by a huge white monster. Going down, the guy was thinking about everything that had happened. He could not believe that he had done such a crazy, reckless thing. When he got to the floor where the girls were hiding, He called out to his classmates and broke into a run. But to his surprise, the room was completely empty and no one responded to the boy. It scared Yeonhwa. The guy stood there in silence in a stupor, not knowing what to expect and where to go next. He saw a broken pot with some kind of plant and a broken window next to it. When he came closer and looked through the window, he saw something. Outside the window, his classmates were running across the roof of the building. They got out but did not wait for him, not even Soyeon, whom he had saved from certain death. He watched the teenagers run away with sadness in his eyes. Did they think that Yeonhwa had been eaten by a monster and had to run away from it too? My classmates took turns descending from the roof of the building's entrance. It was quite high. Soyeon was the last to go down. Probably because of her leg injury, she could not run fast, so she was at the end. She noticed Yeonwoo in the window. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, gave the girl his hand and shouted at her to not be distracted and to come down quickly. It is not clear why they are running away. Then, as if out of nowhere, a zombie monster appeared behind her. It turned out that his classmates were running away from him. How could he catch up with them so quickly? Yeonwoo watched in silence. He would not have time to catch up with his friends. Is this the end and now it's every man for himself? Finally, he called out to his classmates once more. It seems that Yeonwoo did not see that they were running away from the monster, or thought it was another zombie. But the guy did not give up. He ran to the exit. We had to get out of the building. He ran to the hole in the glass that his classmates had made and stopped abruptly. The boy saw a huge zombie monster that was probably chasing his classmates. It seems that Yeonwoo will not get out of this trap so easily. He had to come up with a plan of action as soon as possible. He looked at the picture outside with horror and did not understand what to do now. His classmates had left him here alone in this damned trap. There was only one question in his mind that remained unanswered. Why did they leave him? With or without them, Jeonwoo had to get out somehow and save his life. He began to crawl out of the hole in the glass that his classmates had made. But something stopped him. It was something he saw outside. There was no one there. His classmates were gone. Yeonwoo's face changed dramatically from what he saw outside the window. He cried out in sadness. The guy quickly took out his phone and started typing a message to someone. Yeonwoo wrote in the class group chat that he was staying in the building, hoping they would come back for him. He found Kang Min in his contacts. He was often holding his phone and checking the news, so he must have heard Yeonwoo's call. But then the phone rang sharply. He thought it was Kang Min. Jeonwoo started talking into the phone, calling for help, but no one answered. Suddenly the phone rang again, which scared the guy. He picked up the phone to check what it was. It turned out that it was another danger warning. It said that Seoul Station and several other places where the teenagers were found were declared emergency zones with a special danger. Suddenly, another notification sound came from the toilet. The already frightened boy screamed in fear. He went to the restroom. He opened the door. There were no monsters, and he could breathe a sigh of relief. When he opened the door, he could not believe his eyes. From one of the booths, a rather familiar voice could be heard complaining and hardly crying. It turned out that it was his friend Kim Jubin. He was unable to jump out of the window and was left alone in the building. It seems that the guy was scolding himself for his weakness, because now he will most likely die in a building filled with zombie monks. Yeonwoo knocked on the booth and called Jubin, which scared his friend who was already preparing to die. But Kim Jubin did not answer. So Yeonwoo knocked again and called his friend. Now there were two of them, so it would be easier to get out. In the end, Jubin responded to Yeonwoo's words because he finally recognized the boy's voice. The friend opened the door of the stall that served as his hiding place and asked Yeonwoo what he was doing here. Jubin could not believe his eyes. He looked at his friend and noticed that he was crying. The guy started mocking Jeonwoo, saying he was a loser and crying. After all, real men never cry. In response, Yeonwoo started yelling at his friend that he was actually dumped too, and who else was a loser. Jubin retaliated and yelled back at Yeonwoo that his friend was a snotty little brat and that he had dumped his classmates because they were in his way. But instead, Yeonwoo threw his arms around his friend and said he was glad to see him anyway. Jubin was not prepared for such a display of love, but there was not much time for calf tenderness. They had to get out of the building. Jeonwoo went to the door to see if it was clear. He called out to his friend Kim Jubin to come out of the booth and they got out together. Watch how the two friends got out of the building full of zombies in this episode. Jubin did not like this idea. He said it was better to just close the door and stay inside. Yeonwoo suggested another method, just running away. Jubin insisted that his friend go and lock the door, because hell could happen again. Yeonwoo obeyed and went to the exit to check that everything was clear. The guy stopped. Something caught his attention. He looked again at the window and the broken pot. The place where his classmates had run away. A frightened Jubin ran up to Yeonwoo. He nervously asked what had happened and how his classmates had escaped. It was strange that Jubin did not know how the teenagers had escaped. Yeonwoo said he knew how they escaped. He showed me where his classmates ran. Those moments of the classroom escape ran through his mind again. It was very painful for him. He remembered Soyeon's last look, though it was surprisingly quite frightened. She saw him in the window, but did not stop and continued to run away, although he saved her life twice. Meanwhile, Kim Jubin continued to complain about his classmates. He said they had abandoned them, as if they were nothing, and that they could no longer call them friends. They could not even go out through them. The monsters outside began to gather and group together, but Yeonwoo interrupted his friend's monologue. He asked why Jubin didn't go with them. Couldn't he duck and now pretend that his classmates left him alone? Kim Jubin began to make excuses that it was not like that and that he was right. It was Yeonwoo who was the snotty one, not him. The boys sat silently alone in a corner of the second floor. Jubin interrupted the deathly silence. He asked how long they had to stay in the building in this state. The guy asked if Yeonwoo was hungry. It is not clear how long they have been waiting here. Yeonwoo said they spent about an hour alone, abandoned on the second floor, looking down sadly. It turned out that the guy was looking at his phone. It was making a call to 119, but there was no connection. Jubin was surprised that his friend was still calling security. It was obviously not the first call in an hour. However, Yeonwoo reassured his friend that his parents were almost there to help them. But this did not calm Jae-bin down a bit. After all, nothing would change if Yeonwoo's parents came. There is no way out of the building. Yeonwoo stuck to his opinion because there had to be some other way and continued to search for something on his phone. He received a message from his mother on his phone asking him to watch the news. The situation is really scary, and it is better for the boys not to go out and stay in the building. The mom also sent a link to a news video. Yeonwoo opened it and started watching the video. It said that in some areas of Seoul, where cells of an unknown virus appeared, the government declared an extremely dangerous disaster zone situation. The guys were in the epicenter of the events. The reporter went on to say that martial law had been declared for the first time in 40 years. Therefore, roads and facilities close to the epicenter are blocked. This meant that the guys could not get out of here. They are locked in, and it is not clear when they will be rescued, and if they will be rescued at all. Jubin's mood had noticeably deteriorated. Yeonwoo noticed this and asked if he was okay. The boy asked him to be quiet, holding his head. Suddenly, the boy heard something. He looked up to see what was happening outside the window. They were fire trucks, several of them. Will they finally be rescued and this nightmare will end? Yeonwoo asked Jubin if those were fire trucks. The first thing he thought was that there was a fire in the building. Jubin's mood was pessimistic. He said that firefighters did not come to save them. He added that if he could, he would have set the damn place on fire. But Yeonwoo's attention was interrupted by a fire in a neighboring building. It looked like no one was going to save them. The guy got up and went somewhere. When Kim Jubin asked him, he said that he needed a trash can, but his friend still didn't understand why he needed it. Yeonwoo said it was a good idea and worth a try, but Jubin didn't understand what his friend was talking about or what the idea was. The guy said they should try to create a fire. Maybe then the firemen would come to save them. Jubin did not like this idea. Although he suggested it, he didn't mean it. Burning alive was not part of his plans. Yeonwoo began to carefully examine the room in search of a trash can. Finally, the guy found it and started running to find a lighter and set it on fire. Jubin stood behind him and couldn't believe that his friend Yeonwoo really wanted to do that. The guy stuck his hand into a disgusting trash can full of all kinds of scraps in search of a lighter. Yeonwoo even turned on the flashlight on his phone to see everything better and make sure he didn't miss what he was looking for. Jubin didn't stop yelling at his friend. He still didn't believe that Yeonwoo wanted to set the place on fire, but he was convinced that if there was a fire, they would definitely come to put it out. Suddenly, Kim Jubin's face changed dramatically and turned pale. It looked like he had seen something he didn't want to see. Meanwhile, Jong-woo reached into another trash can and, surprisingly, found a lighter. The boy shouted with joy. His life had regained hope for salvation. The only thing left to do was to set fire to the bucket and wait for the firefighters. Yeon-woo ran to Kim Joo-bin to share the good news. On the way, he tried to light a lighter, but it seemed to be out of gas, so it didn't work. As soon as Yeon-woo approached his friend, Joo-bin immediately began to cover his mouth. He looked very scared and nervous, cautiously peeking out from behind the wall. Yeon-woo did not understand his friend's condition and told him to hurry up and move on. But Joo-bin interrupted him with a strong swear word. It seems that something happened after all. Kim Joo-bin saw a zombie monster in the doorway, unable to leave. Had they really been in the same room all this time? Yeon-woo also leaned over from behind the wall to see what had shocked and frightened his friend so much. The boy's face immediately changed. When they looked closely, they noticed that the zombie monster was still outside the door, but most likely heading toward them. They needed a new plan to save themselves. The events moved to the Seoul highway. There was a huge traffic jam because the roads were blocked. The news showed this highway and said that the government was focused on preventing the spread of the virus. Thanks to videos shot by some isolated citizens, the whole of Seoul was drowning in the apocalypse of this virus. Everything was covered with its white cells, as if a spider was spreading its web. This was the news that Jong-woo's mother read on her phone on the way to his house. She screamed out in horror and told her husband that it looked like the situation was much worse than they thought. They drove up to the road and stopped because the highway was blocked. Each car was checked by a checkpoint. The boy's mother began to quickly dial her son Yeonwa, but he did not answer the phone. The father said that there might be a problem with the connection, but that was impossible, because their son had picked up the phone before. At this time, Yeon-woo's pocket was ringing and vibrating loudly. But the boy could not be distracted, because the monster could hear. Luckily, the zombie monster was still standing at the door. The guys had time to come up with a plan. But suddenly, Yeon-woo's face changed dramatically. He opened his mouth and wanted to scream, but he held back. Something seemed to scare him. The zombie monster moved, but it didn't seem to be going after the boys. False alarm. Jong-woo watched the monster from around the corner for a while longer. In the end, the guy said he didn't think the zombie monster was going to come in. Perhaps if they were quiet, it would go away, and the boys would continue their plan to save the day. Indeed, the zombie monster was standing calmly at the entrance. Kim Joo-bin began to panic and complain about how scared he was when he saw the monster. It appeared very suddenly. Yeon-woo supported him in this, but the boy told his friend Joo-bin that he thought the monster was getting bigger. Yeon-woo went on to say that the white things on his face looked like frog eggs. Then the zombie monster roared. Joo-bin was very frightened and screamed, hoping that the monster did not hear him. Looking closely, the guy really noticed that the blisters that covered 99% of the monster's body, except for the mouth, looked like frog eggs. It was quite disgusting to look at. Joo-bin swore and started making sounds like vomiting. Yeon-woo asked if his friend was okay. My friend shook it off, but he looked very bad. Was his delicate nature really that affected by the frog eggs? Yeon-woo asked again if his friend was okay. Joo-bin assured him not to worry about him. Joo-bin pulled himself together, looked his friend straight in the eye, and asked him again if he was going to set fire to the building, that the firefighters had noticed them and saved them. He asked Yeon-woo to hurry up and finally do something. The guy looked at the almost empty lighter in his hand and began to think about his and Joo-bin's rescue plan. Yeon-woo looked at his friend, out of breath and scared to death, and asked him if he thought everything would be okay. After all, one wrong move, and they would burn in this room. The events moved to the cable car. Everything there was covered with mucus mixed with frog eggs. Suddenly, from behind the booth, Yeon-woo jumped out quietly like a ninja. He landed. He looked around the room and the cable car. He also looked to see if the monster was still standing still. Everything was fine. Time to act now. Meanwhile, Kim Joo-bin stood guard and watched the zombie monster, although he was afraid to even breathe next to it. The boys met and sat down on the stairs. Yeon-woo said he was not sure it was a good idea to start a fire because they could die from breathing in the smoke from the fire. Kim Joo-bin asked what they should do then. Yeon-woo suggested going to the third floor. It looked like the guy had a plan. The plan was to have one entrance and one exit on each floor. The guys were on the second floor. So while one of them is distracting the monster at the entrance, The other one will go upstairs and start a fire on the third floor. Since the cable car was located outside, the sprinkler would not be able to extinguish the fire, and that is why the smoke and fire would only spread. Jubin asked who would go upstairs. He thought Yongwoo's plan was quite reliable, so he had no objections. The boys looked at each other and silently agreed on who would go upstairs to start a fire. Kim Jubin stayed behind to distract the Smoby monster. He was already feeling sorry for Yonwoo and cursing him. After all, his friend would definitely brag to the others that he was the one who climbed up, although it was his idea, so he had to do it. You can't envy Jubin either because he was one-on-one with a huge, voracious monster. Meanwhile, Yonwoo reached the third floor. The lighter surprisingly worked. The boys were lucky. Suddenly, something distracted the rescuer. He heard some strange sounds. He looked up to see what was going on, but there was nothing to see. Jubin was supposed to take care of it, so Yongwoo didn't get distracted anymore. He said to himself that he believed in his friend. He had to believe in him and finish his work. There was only a little more to go, and salvation was at hand. Yonwoo takes a piece of paper from his briefcase and sets it on fire. The next in line was a sack. The boy was getting more and more excited. The fact that he was able to do it gave him confidence, but the joy did not last long. The boy was not allowed to finish the job because a monster suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Yonwoo was setting fire to it when he heard the familiar roar of a zombie monster. The giant climbed out of the roof of the booth. Its mouth was open as if it was preparing to bite. The boy, seeing this, immediately ran away as fast as he could. He didn't understand whether it was the same monster that was on the second floor or a different one, and now there were two of them chasing the boys. The monster jumped out of the booth and growled, which scared the boy and gave him even more strength and motivation to escape. However, Yonwoo could not get far from the zombie monster. The giant was literally breathing down his neck, but he didn't let that stop him and kept running. The giant monster let out its white, ugly tentacles from its mouth to catch up with Yonva. The guy screamed. He did not expect to meet the monster because he was hoping for Kim Jubin. His plan was almost perfect. The young man was holding a piece of paper that he had managed to light. Without hesitation, he threw it to the monster right into its vile tentacles. This gave the daredevil a little head start, and he was able to break away from the zombie monster. Yonwoo was a few steps away from the exit. The boy turned around to see how far he was from the monster, but what happened shocked Yonhwa very much. He saw that such a huge and strong zombie monster began to burn. He was afraid of fire. He stopped and watched what would happen next. It was a hope for salvation, and at least some minimal safety. The monster burned down completely. It turned out to be flammable, even though it was made of wet frog eggs. Yonwoo did not move. He stood there in silent amazement looking at the picture. He had just found a way to kill this virus. The guy could not believe what was happening. Almost the entire zombie monster burned down, leaving only the bones behind. Yonwoo did two things at once. He killed the monster and started the fire. Suddenly, the guy's phone rang. Someone was calling him. It was Kim Jubin. Yonwoo immediately began to brag that he had killed the monster and that it had burned alive. But his friend loudly ordered him to come down. Something must have happened. Jubin said that the zombie monster was gone and he thought the giant had gone upstairs. Then who was burned by Yonwoo, but he wasn't sure he could go back down. He also informed his friend Kim Jubin about this. His friend did not understand why. Yonwoo explained that when he was lighting the fire, the monster attacked him, but he was able to set it on fire. Everything was so hot that the fire blocked Yonwoo's exit. He didn't think about this when he was running away from the monster, but there was no other option. It was either him or him. Yonwoo ran to the scene of the fire and once again made sure that he would not be able to pass through. The fire was getting worse, and there was nothing to put it out. The guy asked Jubin what he should do. His friend yelled at him, called him an idiot, and ordered him to go downstairs as quickly as possible, because he had little time left. Yonwoo heard something behind him and turned around. However, the guy saw nothing. Everything was empty, except for some mucus on the floor, ceiling, and walls. Suddenly, another monster came out from around the corner. It seemed to be the one that Jubin had been following. This monster was huge, twice as big as the one Yonwoo had burned. The guy screamed and hung up the phone. It was time to run away, and quickly. If he didn't know how zombie monsters were made, he would never have guessed that there was a person inside that ugly, faceless giant. Perhaps it was Gale. But there was nowhere to run. There was a fire behind him and a giant monster in front of him that wanted to eat him. There were even more monsters on top. Meanwhile, the fire was getting worse. There was even more smoke. Jun-woo had to choose which danger was safer at that moment. The guy decides to take off his shirt. It looks like he has a new plan. The monster was getting closer and closer, but Yeonwoo was not going to run away. The guy set his hoodie on fire. The monster pounced on Yeonva. Its mouth is about to reach the boy. The young man took a swing and threw this Molotov cocktail at the zombie monster with all his might. Now we had to run away. The fire became even worse. It was getting harder for the guy to breathe. The guy wanted to escape so badly that he forgot to throw away his hoodie and kept running with it. The monster's face was tortured. It seemed to melt and melt before our eyes. The guy realized that fire was his weakness, so he needed to burn this nasty zombie monster. While the monster was recovering from the last portion of fire, Yeonwoo swung with all his might and threw his burning jacket at the beast. The jacket was caught nearby. A little more and the monster would have caught fire. Shocked, Yeonwoo stood in a stupor. He had just exhaled a hopeful breath when, through the wind, his life was once again one step away from death. The monster saw that he was safe and growled at the boy. Now the giant zombie giant had a new goal. He had to take revenge on the boy for setting him on fire. Yeonwoo covered his face with his hands. He realized that he had nowhere to run, so he would at least save Jubin, so he just closed his eyes and prepared to die. And then, out of nowhere, a lit piece of paper came flying in. It was unrealistic luck. The arsonist flew right into the monster. It had not yet had time to attack the boy, so Yeonva was saved. The guy stood up. He should have been dead by now, so he hadn't quite recovered and realized what was going on. That was Kim Jubin. He was running into danger, swearing and throwing burning paper to save his friend. The guy made another attempt and threw another arson at the monster. The boy's eyes were filled with hatred and fear. The adrenaline in his blood was going through the roof and gave him the strength to defend his friend Yeonva. And this target hit the monster right in the back. The poor thing growled. "It is painful to be burned alive." Yeonwoo watched in a stupor. He still could not believe that he was alive. Kim Jubin recovered his friend. He yelled at him and told him to run away immediately. Jeonwoo did just that. After all, this monster was twice as big as the previous one, so two fires did not deprive it of much power. The boys quickly descended the stairs. The main thing was that the monster did not follow them, and the second floor did not start to burn. The boys ran away screaming as fast as they could. Now they faced two dangers, the monster and the fire, which was getting stronger and stronger. Kim Jubin was the first to run. He was not as brave as his friend, so the adrenaline in his blood prevented him from thinking critically and analyzing the situation. Because of this, the boy did not notice the piece of white slime in front of him. If he stepped on it, he would also turn into a monster and most likely burn in this building. Kim Jubin didn't want to die, so he stopped in front of the mucus. But his coordination was impaired, so he just fell face down the stairs. Yeonwoo saw this and ran to help his friend. He promised Jubin his life for his salvation. The guy landed surprisingly on his hands. He didn't seem to hurt anything, but there was another pile of white dangerous virus in front of him. Luckily, Kim Jubin landed right in front of this bunch, so he didn't get infected and won't turn into a big ugly monster that wants to eat everyone. Jubin stood up, but lost his coordination and started to fall. Fortunately, Yeonwoo ran up to him and caught his friend. However, Jubin's reaction was not friendly. He pushed the guy's hand away and told him to get off him. Jeonwoo did not understand why his friend was so angry. His eyes burned with rage. Jubin was seriously angry. The guy kept yelling. He was calling Yeonwoo a snotty brat who thought he was a hero, but couldn't set fire to the place and was sporting everything. If only Yeonwoo had listened to Jubin, all this would not have happened. The guy did not stop. It was as if he wanted to unleash all the anger and fear he had accumulated during the day on his friend. Jubin called Yeonwoo a bastard. He added that the guy was a snotty little brat and nothing else. Yeonwoo was shocked. He did not expect to hear such things from his friend. He understood that Jubin's words were spoken out of emotion, but he would not tolerate such name-calling. It was the last straw. Yeonwoo shouted back and elbowed the guy. Now the boy spoke. He yelled back at his friend Jubin. Did he really want to die? Yeonwoo asked why he was angry with him, because it wasn't the boy's fault that the monster had attacked them all. Yeonwoo added that Jubin was like a scared puppy who could do nothing, because he was so scared and couldn't pull himself together in time. Zhuben called him a bastard again. His friend's words had really hurt him, so now he was burning with rage. Zhuben did not know how to accept his weaknesses. Jonah's mind was blown. The words just kept pouring out of his mouth, stinging his friend like a bee. He said that Zhuben was pathetic because he said that he was the one who abandoned his classmates, when in fact, he was afraid to crouch down and follow them. It was very obvious, but Zhuben denied it. The friend called Yonva a snotty little boy and asked him if he thought he hadn't been dumped. The guy started making excuses, saying that he was just a little late, that's all. But Zhuben didn't believe him. The boys were about to beat each other up. Then Jongwoo noticed something that changed his expression. Zhuben had already returned. They could not believe what they were seeing. Another monster roared at them from the floor below. It was sucked into a pile of slime that was simply spread out on the floor. The boys screamed at what they saw. They immediately forgot about the quarrel. The most important thing now was to run away and save their lives. The monster attacked them, jumping off the ground like a frog. But at that time, the guys were already running away as fast as they could, only having time to turn around and see what was happening behind them. Yeonwoo was the last to run, so he managed to close the door behind him. The monster remained outside. After clearing his throat, Jongwoo said they were safe now. It was time to clear the air and figure out a plan of action. The door was closed, so the monster definitely could not get inside to see the boys. Suddenly, the guys' faces changed and they screamed in a chorus. The monster's tentacles began to crawl through the door and attack the boys. The two friends started to run away, but they had nowhere to run. They had to come up with a new plan. Zhuben again attacked Yeonwoo, accusing him of saying that the monster could not pass through a closed door. They came back to see how the monster was doing and saw that more and more of it was crawling inside. This process was quite slow, so the boys had a head start to escape and think of a new rescue plan. Jongwoo ordered his friend to shut his mouth and run. They needed to get to the other side somehow. The boys froze again in puzzlement. They seemed to see something shocking in front of them. Behind the door was a bunch of monsters chained to the ground with white, disgusting slime. They couldn't get out. The guys were trapped. Jongwoo screamed at the top of his lungs. He did not understand what was happening. What kind of apocalypse was happening in this building? White slime was everywhere outside. The entire building was completely covered with a thick carpet of disgusting slime mixed with dead bodies. Suddenly, something squeaked loudly, which scared the boys. Zhuben jumped up and down in fear. The guys turned toward the sound. Something from the wall was making a terrible, piercingly loud sound, like an alarm. It turned out that it was a fire alarm. It looks like the guy's plan was working. Realizing that it was just an alarm, the boys calmed down. The fire truck was coming soon, so they would be rescued, and the boys would forget the story like a bad dream. However, something frightened the boys again, and they turned their heads in the other direction. Jongwoo and Zhuben saw black, thick smoke coming from the third floor. It looked like the fire had spread in earnest. It would be easier for the rescuers to find them, because now the burning building was visible from afar. But Jongwoo took a lighter out of his pocket. He tried to light it. Zhuben yelled at his friend. He didn't understand why Jongwoo needed a lighter. Did he really want to start another fire? The boy said he would try his best to rekindle the fire. He told his friend Zhuben to find something that could be easily lit as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the body of the zombie monster was almost completely inside. Only its legs remained outside the door. Time was running out. Yeonwoo nervously tried to light the lighter, but it wouldn't give in. There were only sparks. He yelled at the lighter to make it work. The young man's heart was beating frantically. He had to act quickly to save his life. Yeonwoo begged the lighter to produce at least a small flash of light, continuing to nervously light it again and again. Kim Zhuben ran up to the boy. He asked if they had time for this and brought a piece of paper that looked like a newspaper. Now Jongwoo and Zhuben were shouting and cursing at the lighter together because it didn't want to work. Suddenly, Zhuben's face changed dramatically, as if he had seen something very terrible. When Jongwoo saw Zhuben's appearance, he turned his head and screamed. His friend began to run away. It turned out that behind the boys, there was a hole in the window from which their classmates had escaped. And another zombie monster was crawling out of the hole and into their classroom. Yeonwoo fell on his friend Zhuben in fear and screamed. There was nowhere to run. They had to figure out what to do quickly. Meanwhile, the monster was slowly but surely climbing up the wall and climbing out through the window. These monsters never ceased to amaze. Jong-woo screamed even louder. He could not believe that zombie monsters were capable of such things. Just then, Jubin's victorious shout was heard from behind the boy. He was running and obviously headed for the monster. The fearless friend was holding a pot. Yeonwoo could not understand what Jubin was trying to do. He swung, screamed, and threw a pot of plants at the monster. The flower pot flew straight to the target, right in the zombie monster's head. The pot broke, making a loud crashing sound. And under the flattened one was a monster. It looked like it was dead. Jubin and Yeonwoo screamed. Yeonwoo could not yet analyze what had just happened, and Jubin could not believe that he had killed a monster and was not afraid. Under the pot, there was white mucus mixed with the earth, like blood. The boys could not believe that the zombie monster was really dead. Jubin turned to his friend and began to brag. He said that Yeonwoo should take back what he said about him. Jubin no longer looked like a scared puppy who was afraid of his own shadow. Yeonwoo said that now was not the time to talk about it and looked nervously at the floor. But Jubin was not deterred by the frightened look on his friend's face. He continued to remind him that he had saved Yeonwoo's life twice. He realized that he should just agree with his friend and say that he was cool. Letting Jubin have some fun might have given him the self-confidence he clearly lacked. Just then, Yeonwoo's face changed dramatically. His mouth opened wide and his eyes looked like two healthy oranges. Something had clearly shocked the young man. Jubin asked why his friend had stopped talking and stopped praising him. However, the boy did not see that behind him, a zombie monster was rising, covered in earth and with a pot on his head, and it seemed that he was not dead. Yeonwoo shouted that Jubin had come back. He was so worried about his friend because the zombie monster was just a step away. When Jubin turned his head, the huge monster had already risen and roared. It seemed to be very angry with the boy's actions and wanted to pay back. Unfortunately, Kim Jubin didn't have time to react, and the monster managed to attack before the boys started to run away. The giant's tentacles were already flying at poor Jubin. Yeonwoo fell to the ground behind him. He watched the monster eat his friend and couldn't do anything. The boy was as terrified as Jubin. All Yeonwoo had was a lighter. He nervously tried to light it. It was a matter of life and death, and the lighter was his last hope. The guy was screaming and swearing at the lighter because it didn't work. He looked at his friend, who was almost completely eaten by the monster. He felt so sorry for his friend. If he set fire to the monster, Jubin would burn as well. But it was worth a try. There was no other way out. Yeonwoo shouted his friend's name, as if to let him know that he was there trying to save Jubin. He couldn't let him be eaten by the monster. Meanwhile, the zombie monster had already reached the boy's face. Was it really the end? The chances of survival were decreasing every second. The giant was very strong. Yeonwoo nervously lit the lighter again and again. A little more and the boy started to cry, but he held on for the sake of his friend. He had to save him at any cost. Jubin's face began to turn white. Frog eggs appeared like pimples on his face. The last thing Jubin said were words of help. He looked at his friend and begged for Yeonwoo to think of something. The guy saw it and screamed. He felt so helpless and guilty for what had happened. In his eyes and cry, you could feel the sadness for his friend. Jubin's body began to merge into one with the zombie monster. He couldn't speak anymore, only mumbled. It seemed to be very painful. Yeonwoo did not give up and continued to light the lighter. It was supposed to produce a flame. It hit water and stone. Suddenly, the lighter finally produced the long-awaited flame. Hope for rescue returned. Yeonwoo just had to figure out how to save his friend. But the joy did not last long. The boy heard strange, familiar screams. He looked up and could not believe his eyes. A zombie monster entered the room, which Yeonwoo had forgotten about while he was busy saving his friend Jubin. But the monster did not forget. All this time, it had been crawling through the door a little bit at a time, and now it was heading for Yeonwoo to eat him. The boy screamed. He didn't know what to do or who to save. Please support the channel, like and subscribe for new episode. But Yeonwoo did not give up and began to react and act quickly. He lit a pot of plants that was lying nearby, hoping that the monster would also catch fire in this way. Fortunately, it did, and the monster caught fire. Yeonwoo's chances of saving his friend Jubin increased. Now he had to deal with his monster. The earth monster quickly caught fire. It screamed in pain, its huge mouth finally unhooked from Jubin. Meanwhile, the boy was hanging on the tentacles of the burning zombie monster. It looked like it was starting to stick off a little bit, and it was unknown whether Jubin would be infected. At this time, Yanwu attacked his zombie monster with screams. The boy yelled at him to get out because he didn't belong here. Yanwu took a swing at him with a piece of newspaper that Jubin had given him. The monster managed to jump out at the boy. He had to deal with this monster first, and then he would help Jubin not to burn alive. Yanwu swung again, shouting death wishes to the monster. This gave him confidence in what was happening. The boy ran up to the monster. He was about to make the decisive blow that would set the monster on fire and kill it. With the words, "Go to hell," Yanwu attacked the giant. The zombie monster was flying at the boy. Its left side was already a little hot from the fire that was about to reach the giant. But this did not stop the monster. It attacked further. Its big, ugly jaws were about to bite into the poor but brave Yanwu. The guy was very surprised. He thought that zombie monsters were afraid of fire. Yanwu expected the giant to get scared and leave the boy behind, but he did not stop. The boy's attempted shot burned the zombie giant. It seems that Yanwu did not want to waste all the fire on this nasty, disgusting monster. The giant's cheek was burned. It was blackened and smelled like fried food. However, it was still more pleasant than what those vile monsters actually smelled like. Yanwu looked at the monster and burned with hatred and rage. It seems that the monster was not burning enough. It needed a bigger fire. The guy took a swing and threw a piece of flower pot foliage on fire at the zombie monster lying on the ground. The giant monster had just opened its ugly mouth. The leaves of the plant were flying right at him. He was about to taste something from hell, but Yanwu himself was frightened by what was happening. The situation was out of control. The zombie monster that was attacking the boy caught fire. Black as its soul, the smoke rose up. It looked like the fire was going to spread. Yanwu did not expect this to happen. Meanwhile, his friend Jubin was still lying unconscious near the burning zombie monster. Yanwu immediately thought of him and figured out how to help him. He had to carefully get Jubin away from the flames without getting infected with the white frog egg virus himself. When he looked closer, he saw that Jubin was wounded and covered in frog eggs in places. He was not breathing. Yanwu fell to the floor and screamed. It looked like there was no saving his friend. The guy started to cry. Yanwu looked at this terrible picture and kept apologizing, hoping that Jubin heard him and that it would make his death a little easier. Yanwu was hysterical. Tears streamed down from his eyes. He felt so sorry for his friend. He felt so helpless at that moment. Jubin had saved his life, but Yanwu could not. The body of his friend was engulfed in flames. No one had ever managed to escape the monster's jaws. Yanwu sat shaking and looking at Jubin in his last moments. His soul was devastated, but he did not have to be sad for long. Suddenly, behind him, Yanwu heard something very loud. Several more giant monsters stuck to the glass where he was sitting. Yanwu was left completely alone and defeated. He did not know how to cope with such an army alone. The guy got up and started to run away with his back. He looked at this picture and did not believe that things could get any worse. Hadn't Yanwu suffered enough? From behind the glass, one of the monsters screamed, making himself known. He saw Yanwu and now his goal was to grab the boy and kill him. The guy turned to the side at a strange sound and was terrified. A whole army of huge, ugly zombie monsters was approaching him. He wasn't sure he could handle them alone, but he had to. He had to act quickly and smartly. He had almost no options for escape because 2 floors were on fire and emitting black smoke, and a new batch of monsters was waiting outside. The zombie monsters were approaching the boy. It seems that the previous one had opened the door when he was crawling through it, and other well-wishers came running to hear Yanwu's cries. Meanwhile, the whole of Seoul was covered in white slime and frog eggs. It felt like a spider's lair during the mating season. The events shifted to the bus that took the teenagers on this ill-fated excursion, which turned into hell for everyone. Hanmi sat on one of the seats and greeted everyone. It turned out that the girl had turned on her camera and started her video blog. Hanmi asked how the others were feeling and if they had seen what was happening on the streets of Seoul on the news. She continued that they barely escaped and are now hiding in a bus. There were many of them near the cable car. Kang Ji-hoon, the headman, came up behind her and yelled at her. He asked why Homie had turned on the live broadcast and asked her to turn it off. The girl replied that she would follow him to the end. Jong Jong-yi wrote in the live chat. He said he was glad the teens were safe and added that he was worried about them. He added that it was no time for jokes in his neighborhood either. The observer then asked if it was normal that Honmi was now on the live stream. The girl told him that it was perfectly normal, as she thought there were no monsters around. However, Ji-hoon shouted out that it was not normal, but did not have time to finish the sentence. Honmi continued to tell me that it was a normal school trip to Seoul. At first, all the students were in the classroom. Unfortunately, only a small number of them managed to survive. In the back, So-young sat alone. She didn't want to talk to anyone or do a live broadcast with Han-wi. The girl was looking at the floor. Her gaze betrayed that she was heavily burdened with something. Meanwhile, Han-mi was going to tell us something interesting in the chat room. Jong-jong's follower said that if you look at the cells, you can see the nucleus. Han-mi was very surprised by this information. She didn't know or even notice it before. The subscriber added that he had seen it on YouTube. He said that the video conveyed the message that we need to be more careful. Another anonymous subscriber asked if the teens were near the Namsan cable car. He added that it was near Seoul Station. Han-mi confirmed this information and asked what he was getting at. The subscriber said that he did not live in Seoul, but the news had just told him to come to a temporary shelter near the affected areas of the station. Jong confirmed this information and told them to go there. Kang Ji-hoon, the headman, joined the conversation. They could not believe that there was a temporary shelter at Seoul Station. The subscribers added that teenagers should watch the news. Seoul is on lockdown. They thought the class would be able to leave Seoul by train. The teens had to hurry and escape. 3 classmates have already gathered around blogger Hong-mi. Kang Min joined them. He was interested in the information that Seoul was blockaded. He didn't understand what they were supposed to do. Hong-mi thanked her friends for the information and said they were the best. Kang Ji-hoon added that they needed to go to Seoul Station, and Kang Min found the way to it. It was really close. Suddenly, Ji-hoon heard something outside. He felt some kind of danger. He ordered everyone to duck. Chief Kang looked out the window and expected to see the cause of his concern. The teenagers must not forget what was happening around them and that they were not safe anywhere. And then a monster appeared in the window. He was very thin, with a thin neck and a hump. On his head was something strange, like a bird, or rather a pigeon. Hearing the sounds on the bus, the zombie monster turned to see if there were any new victims for him. Up close, he looked even worse. His skin was covered in feathers mixed with white frog eggs and slime. The monster screamed and hissed. He stopped and waited to make sure no one was on the bus. The teenagers quickly all hid under their chairs and sat quietly, waiting for the monster to calm down and leave. However, it seemed that the monster was not going to leave. He could smell their fear and scent, but he was not smart enough to enter the bus and verify his hunch. He just stood there and growled, instilling fear in the potential victims. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, sat next to Honmi. The girl put her hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Ji-hoon was angry and cursed at the zombie monster for not leaving. Suddenly, an innocent cat walked by the nasty soulless monster. The giant reacted sharply to him and returned. It seems that the monster has found a new victim. The cat turned to the zombie's growl. He was not afraid of it because he did not know what it was capable of. However, the monster made its victory cry, which meant that the zombie had spotted a new victim and intended to kill and eat it. The poor animal felt the danger and started running. Cats are very fast creatures, so he will most likely be able to escape from the zombie monster. The giant chased him. The monster's attention quickly switched from one victim to another. The teenagers were saved this time. The teenagers breathed a sigh of relief. The danger was over. Finally, they could open their mouths and express the fear that had been in their veins for 5 minutes. Kang Min said he looked at a map and found out that Seoul Station is 1.4 kilometers away. That's about a 30-minute walk. Ji-hoon said it was too dangerous to walk outside, so they needed another plan. Just then, a woman's voice came from the back seat and called out Yeonwoo's name. It was So-yeon. It turned out that she was still thinking and remembering the boy. She asked what they were going to do with him, because he was left there alone. She added that Jongwoo had stayed there to wait for them. So-young felt a storm of emotions inside. She felt very sorry for the boy and also blamed herself for not being able to save him. The faces of his classmates were shocked. They no longer remembered the boy. Everyone was thinking about something else. However, the girl continued to speak and added that she had seen Yeonhwa when they were running away and that he was on the second floor. The last thing the girl said in her monologue was that she was sure that Yeonwoo was waiting for them and that she could help him even now. Chief Kang Ji-hoon remained silent and thought about the girl's words. It was clear that he was angry that Seo-young was so worried about some sucker named Yeonwoo. Perhaps Kang Ji-hoon also felt something for the girl. In the end, the guy said that So-yeon could try to go there by herself if she wanted to. He said this on purpose, so that she would be scared and not do it. It seems that Yeonwoo had displeased Ji-hoon with something, and that's why he was pointing knives at him. To make it worse, he added that she should think twice, because the situation was not good, and just stood up. He never even looked at the girl. All the other classmates watched the situation and could not believe that Kang Ji-hoon could be so ruthless. The starosta added that they were going to the Seoul train station. He put himself in charge and told them to trust him. It's a pity he didn't act like he was in charge when they were all rescued by Yeonwoo on the cable car. Kang Ji-hoon said that he sympathized with Yeonwoo, but it was too late to go back there. It was suicide. These words did not feel sincere. He said them so that his classmates wouldn't realize how selfish he really was. The last thing he said was that So-yeon should have realized it was too late. In such a place, Yeonwoo could not survive. With this phrase, Kang Ji-hoon wanted to demotivate Seo-young and everyone else who felt sorry for Yeonwoo. Meanwhile, everything in Yeonwoo was on fire. The fire broke out in earnest, because everything in the cable car building was covered with a white sticky slime virus. As here, fortunately, the fire detectors worked and turned on the water. This should have dampened the flames a bit. Yeonwoo was holding on to the wall because he could no longer stand on his own and orient himself in space. He was feeling very bad. There was more and more black smoke. Jeonwoo was choking and barely breathing. He had to live. The fire department was about to arrive and save him. On the floor of the building were the corpses of hideous zombie monsters. Everything was on fire. The room was almost invisible because of the black smoke. Unfortunately, the guy did not make it. He held on to the last, but there was too much smoke and Yeonwoo fainted and fell to the ground. If someone did not save him immediately, he would suffocate and burn alive. For a second, the guy woke up and came to his senses. His body was struggling. He didn't want to give up. Not today. Drops of water from the ceiling fell on him. He was not fully aware of what was happening around him. He seemed to be fainting again. Suddenly, from somewhere across the room, I heard the familiar scream of a zombie monster. Now it was a scream of pain. The big, ugly monster was burning alive. Yeonwoo had defeated him, but at what cost? The boy stretched to stand up and defend himself. He probably thought that the monster was not yet defeated. Then he noticed something very strange on his hand. He lowered it to take a closer look. The guy thought he was hallucinating. It couldn't be possible. Yeonwoo put his hand right to his face to assure himself that he was imagining it and that it was all the effects of breathing black smoke. But unfortunately, no. There were frog eggs on the boy's hand. He did not understand how he could have contracted this virus because Yeonwoo was very careful and cautious with monsters. It seemed to be the end. No one survived the frog egg virus infection. Yeonwoo realized that it was the end. He would die before he could turn into a bloodthirsty, disgusting, miserable monster and not feel the pain of transformation. He looked at his hand and fainted. At this time, the virus on his arm was growing more and more. The process was irreversible. The infection entered his body and spread through his blood and skin. The boy was lying helplessly on the floor of the burning building, inhaling the harmful black smoke. His whole life flashed before his eyes. He caught himself thinking that he had lived very little. His body will most likely not even be recognized, because by then it will have turned into a virus and become overgrown with white frog eggs, so he will not be buried. A miserable death. Now, the whole building was burning with bright flames. Everyone who was there and turned into monsters would die. They won't be remembered, won't be written about in the newspapers, because these people will not be found and recognized, unconscious, Jianwu was lying on the floor when he suddenly heard some sounds that made him regain consciousness. How he wanted to live. He opened his eyes because the sound seemed quite familiar and expected. It turned out that they were fire trucks. They came to extinguish the fire, but it was unknown whether they would find a semi-conscious Yanva. And the guy was already infected with the virus. If only they had arrived a few minutes earlier. Meanwhile, the events moved to the bus stop where the teenagers were hiding. Headmaster Kang Ji-hoon emerged from behind one of the vehicles. It seems that the class decided to flee to Seoul Station despite the danger on the street. The boy was looking around the area so that the teenagers could get there safely and avoid monsters. It was clear in front of them. Chief Kang Ji-hoon looked the other way. He did not want any unexpected trouble in the form of zombie monsters attacking from around the corner. On the other hand, everything was also clean. The previously lively and crowded capital was now so empty and gray. It was completely saturated with fear and pain. After checking that everything was clear, Kang Ji-hoon ran to another bus and hid behind it. He approached the front door of the vehicle. It looked like he had a plan. Finally, Kang Ji-hoon began to fulfill his role as headman, instead of hiding behind the girls' backs. He opened the door handle, probably wanting to get inside. But the cautious boy did not check whether there was anyone in the unknown bus. Suddenly, the starosta shouted to someone, opening the car door. It turned out that he was addressing his classmates, who were hiding behind their bus and waiting for instructions from the miraculous starosta in charge. He told them to hurry up because the door was unlocked. And the class, like soldiers, moved on command and ran to the bus, which was to serve as a new shelter and safe place. As soon as the teenagers ran inside, the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, pounced on them with questions. He asked a rhetorical question about whether Hannah could run faster. The girl was lagging behind everyone else. She was not yet on the bus. Kang Ji-hoon was looking for the key and asked if his classmates had seen him. They started looking for the bus keys together. Hanmi asked the elder if he was sure he could drive the whole bus. Kang Ji-hoon replied that he had 120 hours of driving experience in the game, so he was confident in his abilities and skills. Meanwhile, a very out of breath, Hannah came running. She looked at the floor and barely ran inside the bus. Her classmates were alarmed to see her in such a state. Kana's legs and arms were shaking violently, like those of an elderly woman. She was breathing heavily and could not say a word. Her friend Hanmi ran up to the girl. She was worried about her classmate and asked if she was okay. Suddenly, Hannah started screaming a lot. She said she couldn't take it anymore. She had a hard time finding the words. She added that she wanted to stay here because she couldn't run anymore. Hanmi told her friend to calm down. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon joined their conversation. He told Hannah to think twice. Did she really want to give up? Hanmi was shocked by her classmate's words. The headman added that he was sick of Hannah and her antics. The girl's face changed dramatically. She did not expect to hear this from the man who had taken responsibility for the class. Kang Ji-hoon's face was very serious. There was not an ounce of pity in it. His words were like knives. The last thing he said was that they couldn't stay here and that whining alone wouldn't help. Hanmi stood up for her friend. She criticized the words of the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, and said that he could have said it differently. But her classmate did not hear her and did not want to accept his guilt. Xiao-young was watching the scene. Hanmi said that Ji-hoon wasn't being an asshole. The headman replied that he was just doing and saying what he had to do and the girl should leave him alone because he was the boss. So-young was about to say something. She was outraged by the headman's behavior, and she began to see how callous and cruel their classmate, Ji-hoon, was. But instead of words of reconciliation, she could only let out a cry of pain. Her face twisted. Something had happened to the girl. It turned out that it was her knee. It was aching terribly, and the wound was still not healed and bleeding. Kang Min came up behind her. He saw that the girl was worried about her injured leg and asked how she was doing. The classmate was sincerely worried about his friend. So-young turned her head and was a little surprised. Never before had her classmate Kang Min been so attentive and caring. He told her to sit down because she didn't look good. Before, it was Yong-woo who was so attentive to her. The girl fussed. She replied briefly that she didn't want to sit down because she was fine. So-young didn't want to show any weakness, because she didn't know if they would attack her and leave her alone, like they did with Yeonwoo and Kim Jubin. Kang Min remained silent. In turn, Seo Young asked what the boy was doing. He was doing something inside the bus. Min answered with a question. He asked if So Young knew what the thing was that he had just taken out of the bus and was holding in his hands. He added that he had noticed it recently. Every bus had one of these things. Kang Min held out his hand to hand this mysterious thing to So Young. The girl was in a stupor. She understood what it was, but she didn't expect such signs of attention from a guy who had been completely indifferent to her before. It was a red little emergency hammer. It could break glass in case of danger without harming the owner. Kang Min continued and said that such things should be collected. After all, no one knows when they will be useful, perhaps on a cable car. The guy was talking and smiling at the girl. He really liked her. He was a little nervous. It was noticeable. The last thing he said was that he would give the hammer to Soyeon. If they were attacked by monsters, she would be able to break the glass and save herself. The girl was even more embarrassed, even blushing a little. She was pleased with the signs of attention. It was a pity that So Young did not see the care in Yeonwoo's actions or did not want to notice it. Their sweet moment was interrupted by the headman, Kang Ji-hoon. He shouted that he hadn't found anything, so he couldn't start the bus. He added that there was no time to waste and ordered everyone to follow him. The starosta behaved like a real dictator. He never even looked at his friends. His true face was beginning to show. Kang Ji-hoon ran first between the next two buses. The cars were parked in the middle of the Seoul Road, which was blocked. After examining the area again, the boy ran on. He did not look back at his friends and did not give them signs to follow him. Ji-hoon was on his own. There was an inconspicuous shop with a bus stop between the two buses that the boy had just run between. And Kang Ji-hoon didn't even notice it or pay attention. In the reflection of that shop, a figure could be seen watching the teenagers run. She was an elderly woman. She looked silently at her classmates. Her face was not the most pleasant. The last bus was in front of the class. I had to act as cautiously as possible because there was nothing left to hide behind. Kang Ming asked what to do if they didn't find the keys on the last bus. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, commanded that they would walk to the Seoul train station. The teenagers had already walked some of the way. Kang Ji-hoon looked out from behind the bus, saw that the area was clear, and commanded them to run now. The first to run was the self-elected leader, Kang Ji-hoon. He shouted for the others to keep up and run after him. Most likely this was addressed more to Hannah, who was a problem in their team. Kang Ji-hoon saw a target in front of him, the door. He ran toward it and did not look back. The boy started pulling the handle to get inside the bus and fulfill his plan. He had to prove to everyone that he could save his classmates. Suddenly, from behind him, he heard an old, unfamiliar voice shouting at him not to open the bus. The fearless leader, Kang Ji-hoon, was scared to death and screamed as he turned toward the sound of the voice. In front of him, inside the bus, the boy saw a monster. This also scared him, because the door handle was about to open. The monster growled at Kang Ji-hoon, making itself known. His scream frightened the starosta so much that he dropped the mat and began to fall to the ground, covering his face with his hands. Kang Min stood with the rest of the teenagers behind the previous bus and shouted to his friend to run away immediately. Everyone was terrified. Suddenly, an old woman who had been watching what was happening came out of the shop and shouted for the teenagers to run to her. My classmates were shocked. They didn't expect anyone else to be there but them. The teenagers were not going to run away and just stood there. The old lady noticed her classmates' concern and called out to them again, telling them to hurry up because the monster could get out of the bus or the noise would call other zombies. The woman was very worried and anxious, and she called the children for the third time. The old woman began to order them to run away immediately, but this scared the teenagers even more. Some unknown elderly woman shouted and ordered them to run to her. The faces of their classmates showed distrust. Suddenly, a seemingly crazy old lady shouted that the bus was full of monsters. The teenagers had to run away from it immediately. This proof was decisive, and the classmates jumped up and ran as fast as they could to the old woman. Now she didn't seem so crazy. The headman, Kang Ji-hoon, also managed to escape. And all the teenagers ran into the store, falling down in front of the entrance. It seems that the bus full of monsters scared them a lot. The children's hearts were pounding so hard that even the woman could hear it. The teenagers slammed the door behind them. Some of them fell to the floor, and everyone was laughing together. Hunmi said that her heart was jumping out of her chest. She was running so hard. Suddenly, someone called out to the teenagers. It was not an old woman's voice because it sounded young and painfully familiar. So-yeon recognized him and turned to have her words confirmed. She could not believe her ears and eyes. Two other teenagers ran up to the girl. They seemed to be their classmates. The girls could not believe that So-yeon was alive. They were very happy to see her again. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo was not doing as well as the rest of his classmates. The guy was in a dark room alone. He wondered if he had died and gone to hell. According to the boy, hell looked like this. Suddenly, the young man heard something. He still felt very unsafe and listened to every rustle. He did not understand where he was or how he got there. The last thing he remembered was that he was lying on the floor in a burning building. It turned out that it was a huge, ugly zombie monster with 3 legs, similar to the one that killed his friend Jubin. The boy was holding a burning flower pot trunk. He swung to the one that turned out the last thing he held room alone. Yeonwoo believed that up to the sound. Suddenly, Hunmi behind pounding so hard that even the woman could hear it. The teenagers slammed the door behind them. Some of them fell to the floor, and everyone was laughing together. Hunmi said that her heart was jumping out of her chest. She was running so hard. Suddenly, someone called out to the teenagers. It was not an old woman's voice because it sounded young and painfully familiar. So-yeon recognized him and turned to have her words confirmed. She could not believe her ears and eyes. Two other teenagers ran up to the girl. They seemed to be their classmates. The girls could not believe that So-yeon was alive. They were very happy to see her again. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo was not doing as well as the rest of his classmates. The guy was in a dark room alone. He wondered if he had died and gone to hell. According to the boy, hell looked like this. Suddenly, the young man heard something. He still felt very unsafe and listened to every rustle. He did not understand where he was or how he got there. The last thing he remembered was that he was lying on the floor in a burning building. It turned out that it was a huge, ugly zombie monster with 3 legs, similar to the one that killed his friend Jubin. The boy was holding a burning flower pot trunk. He swung it at the monster. The fire was to save Yeonva. The guy took a swing at the zombie monster and was about to strike. Suddenly, someone's disgusting hand, covered in frog eggs and mucus, cold as a dead hand, touched Yeonwoo. This course of events scared the guy a lot. He did not expect to see what he saw. The owner of the arm spoke to Yeonwoo. He asked why the guy didn't help him, even though the stranger had asked him to. It turned out that it was his friend Kim Jubin. The guy's mouth was covered with frog eggs. His voice was very nasty, piercing to the bone. It gave me goosebumps. Jubin said that he begged for help, but Yeonwoo did not help. The guy was very scared. He didn't expect to see his friend here, but Jubin didn't look like his friend. It was like he was some kind of demon in front of him. Still, Yeonwoo began to nervously apologize to his friend. The boy took his hand away from Kim Jubin's infected paws, but Yeonwoo's hand had already become covered with blisters from the frog's paws. The boy recalled that his hand was already infected before he died, but Yeonwoo was still afraid and screamed. His eyes widened. He did not understand why his friend Kim Jubin had done this to him. The guy looked at his hand. It was increasingly covered with frog egg blisters. Jubin noticed this and told Yeonwoo not to worry. Jubin's mouth was being eaten away by the frog egg virus. His lips were almost invisible, and almost all of his gums were exposed. His friend told him that Yeonwoo should become like him. Kim Jubin's gaze was glassy, making him look crazy. Yeonwoo's friend added that then they could be friends again, like before. Meanwhile, the frog egg virus blisters were getting bigger. These words made Yeonwoo's blood run cold. The boy's face changed dramatically. Those were the words of a madman. He turned to look at his friend Kim Jubin. Suddenly, the guy screamed loudly. He jumped out of bed. Yeonwoo could not understand where he was and what was happening. He felt as if he was waking up the morning after a night out at the club. He shook it off as if he had just run a marathon. It seems that it was just a nightmare and nothing really happened. He looked around to see what was in front of him to figure out where he was. The last thing he remembered was the fire, the floor, and the Namsan cable car building. In front of him, Jong-woo saw a few more beds, white walls, lots of folders, and wardrobes. The boy still had a hard time understanding and analyzing. Just then, Jong-woo noticed something. He felt a sharp pain in his arm, as if his consciousness had only just come back and his senses had returned. The guy looked at his right hand. It was all wrapped and bandaged. Only 3 fingers were visible. The pain in his hand began to grow worse. He was interrupted by 2 adults who entered the room. Both had masks on their faces. One of them, wearing a yellow shirt, seemed to be a doctor. The adults were talking about a manager named Lim, who was supposed to come. Up close, I could see that the other one was an officer. He was asked to take care of this manager tomorrow. They didn't realize that Yeonwoo was already awake and waiting for an explanation. Like here, the officer told the doctor to take a look at the ward. Surprisingly, the doctor was quite surprised. Did he really not expect Yeonwoo to regain consciousness so quickly? Or maybe the doctor didn't expect him to wake up at all, but Yeonwoo was as surprised as the doctor when he saw him. As if nothing had happened, the doctor asked how the patient's arm was and congratulated him on the fact that the guy had regained consciousness. Yeonwoo was silent. He was in a stupor. The man in the yellow shirt told him to make himself at home, but he had to fill out some paperwork. And then one of their employees had to show Yeonwoo a tour of the facility where the boy was being held. But the young man was still not analyzing the information very quickly, so he just stared open-mouthed and silent at the 2 men who had probably come to visit him. He was given a pen and paper. Yeonwoo started filling them out. It seems that the boy was left-handed because he held the pen skillfully. It was strange that his right hand was infected. In a way, Yeonwoo was lucky. The officer controlled the boy. Yeonwoo asked him where to write his address, and the uniformed man told him to just write his contact information. Yeonwoo politely followed the orders of the adults without asking any questions. The officer was very surprised by this. It seems that other patients were not so polite and immediately attacked the workers with a lot of questions. But Yeonwoo just silently followed all the orders. Perhaps he just hadn't fully recovered yet. The man in uniform could not stand it and started talking to Yeonwoo. He said that the boy was lucky. The young man remained silent, digesting the information the officer said. So the officer continued. He said it was really hard to survive now. He added that in Namsan, where the cable car was, there is a fire station, and his friend who worked there found the guy unconscious. In fact, he saved Yeonwoo. However, the boy was not surprised at all. He just nodded to the officer and continued writing. The man in uniform stalled. Wasn't Jonah curious about how he was saved? He had been 1 step away from death, and now he showed no reaction or words of gratitude for being saved. But Yeonwoo's answer struck him. He asked what kind of city it was. His face looked so calm that it was scary at times. The officer's face changed dramatically. He was very surprised by Yeonwoo's question. Did the boy not remember how he almost died? Instead, the officer took him on a tour of the room. It looked like a big gym, with high walls and lots of windows, so it was bright. Surprisingly, there were quite a few people in the building. The officer said that it used to be a gym for local residents, but they received an official letter from the disaster relief headquarters. The man in uniform continued that they were ordered to make this place a quarantine zone for survivors, and to serve as an emergency shelter. He clarified that everyone who was rescued in the area was here. Meanwhile, a man came up to a group of people and shook his hand and asked how the company was doing. He and his colleagues were wearing yellow shirts. A young man from that company asked the employee if all the roads were really blocked, asked what time it was, and whether there was any point in blocking the roads. Yeonwoo was watching. He and the officer were still standing there watching the scene. Just then, Yeonwoo heard one of the patients asking if he could go back to Bundanga. He also wanted to return to Seoul, so he asked the officer about it. Yeonwoo asked strange questions, as if he didn't remember what was happening in Seoul. The officer was a little confused by this question, but he put it down to the fact that the guy hadn't fully recovered yet. Perhaps he had partially lost his memory due to shock. The human body often erases memories that cause pain. The man in uniform told the boy that Seoul was now completely closed to prevent the virus from spreading to other regions. It was clear from Yeonwoo's reaction that he was genuinely surprised by what he heard. He quickly started looking in his pockets for something, even though he was wearing someone else's clothes. He didn't seem to remember that either. He just said that it was bad that the capital was blocked. In the end, Yeonwoo found nothing and told the officer that he needed to call his parents. He asked if the uniformed man knew where his phone was, which he could not find in his pockets. The officer quickly ran to the door and said that Yeonwoo needed to wait, and that a man would find his things and bring them to him. Yeonwoo stayed waiting, a little worried. Everyone was acting very strangely around him. He couldn't remember what happened, why the roads of Seoul were blocked, and why the officer ran away so scared. Suddenly, the guy's arm became very sore, making itself felt. The pain was sharp. It felt like something was cut out of it, some part of it. Yeonwoo held it up to his face to examine it. He still didn't understand what had happened to it and why it was twisted and hurting. The guy looked at his arm for a minute and tried to remember. He felt that he was about to remember, because the pain seemed to bring his consciousness back. Suddenly, he began to remember. His memories began to appear in his mind from the end, starting with the most recent ones. He remembered hearing a fire siren. I remembered that I was lying on the floor of a burning building. He wondered who had set it on fire. He remembered that he was waiting for a group of rescuers, but in his mind, he was preparing for death. So he miraculously survived and has to thank this officer friend for saving him and taking him out of the flames. Finally, the guy recalled that his hand was covered with white blisters, as if he had been stung by nettles or several nettles, so the size of the blisters was too large. However, the guy could not remember what exactly happened to his arm and why he was lying on the floor of the burning building alone. He could not remember anyone else inside. He still stood motionless like a statue and looked at his wounded arm, trying to remember what happened on that fateful day. Suddenly, someone called him by name, interrupting his session of digging through the memory gaps, which scared him quite a bit. It seems that his body was still tense due to stress or fear. Yeonwoo turned toward the sound, and his face changed dramatically. He could not believe his eyes. It was some guy. He was smiling broadly and asking Yeonwoo where the others were and why he was alone. Please support the channel, like and subscribe for new episode. Two of his classmates noticed his condition and realized everything. Their faces also changed dramatically, but they were waiting for Yeonwoo's comments. He held his head and screamed. His body began to tremble. He was about to cry. Yeonwoo began to blame his death on the zombie monsters that his friends had fled from in the burning cable car building. The events moved to the school's classroom. The teacher stood in the center of the classroom and told them what she thought about their group flow. She told the children to conduct the experiment in pairs, and then she would check everything after work. The children were indignant. They did not like this idea from the teacher. The class teacher said that if they didn't like it, she could replace the experiment with an English test. Yeonwoo sat in the back and listened silently to what the teacher was saying. Unlike the other children, he did not resent it at all. All the teenagers got up and sat down at their desks when the teacher left the classroom. They were discussing who would do the experiment with whom, and just talking about their own business. Suddenly, a single camera guy came up behind him. He started talking to Yeonwoo about the experiment. He seemed to want to be paired with him. It turned out that it was Kim Jubin, his friend. He said that the experiment the class teacher had given them was easy, and added that school sucked. Jubin checked his phone and asked what ideas Yeonwoo had. If there were none, then the boy would be in charge of their pair. Yeonwoo said that he had no ideas and would like to hear what his classmate had to say. He also added that if Kim Jubin watched another animated movie, he would kill him, to which Jubin smiled and called Yeonwoo a snot. It seems that this name was given to him by his class. Kim Jubin said he had a brilliant idea. He was saying something about a cosplay event in Seoul. The guy kept looking at his phone, which may be why Jubin had poor eyesight and wore glasses. Yeonwoo called his friend a sick bastard. Jubin was amused, as was his friend. He asked who Yeonwoo was going to work with then, and the guy told him that he wasn't going to work with anyone. He planned to do nothing. The scene shifted back to the frog egg storage facility. Yeonwoo sat with his head bowed. One of his classmates asked if the rest of the class had left him and Kim Jubin there. They were outraged by what Jeonwoo had told them. Another classmate echoed the question and added that they had acted like real bastards. Yeonwoo recalled the picture of the rest of the class running out of the room and fleeing by jumping off the roof. It was the last time he saw them. The guy did not answer, was silent, and thought about his own. Anger gripped his body and mind. He also remembered Soyeon. She had seen him in the window of the building. Didn't the girl say anything to her classmate and not want to go back for him? He couldn't be angry with her. His feelings of sympathy took over, but he was still very disappointed in this girl. Classmates began to ridicule the rest of the class that had left Kim Jubin and Lee Yong-woo in the cable car building. They humiliated them in every possible way, hoping that it would cheer the boy up at least a little. After all, he had lost his best friend. It seems that these classmates had a warm feeling for the young man. Somewhere inside, Yeonwoo was pleased, but he was not in the mood for that right now. He was even a little bit amused by the whole situation. He kept his head down, looking at the floor. It turned out that it was the same classmates who had used soju on him. It was Park Min and Han Song-yu. They were being very nice to him now. This amused Yeonwoo. He decided not to trust these guys, but he didn't want to show it. Park Min was looking at something on his phone the whole time. He said he was going to teach those bastards a lesson. Han Seong-yun supported his friend, but unfortunately, there was no connection to write on Kakako Talk. Meanwhile, Jeonwoo had managed to tell his classmates how he had survived that hell. Isuri was sitting at the back and was also listening to Jeonwoo's story. She asked if he was sure about what he was saying. She asked if it was true that Kang Min had dumped him. For some reason, she did not mention the names of the other classmates who were also there on the cable car. The girl still didn't look up. Just then, two friends interrupted the conversation. Park Min attacked Isuri for insinuating that Yeonwoo was cheating. Han Seong-yun supported his friend and added that it was disgusting that bookworms were protecting each other. He told the girl to go study for her exams, since all she ever did was read books. Isuri did not react in any way to the provocations of her classmates. She just apologized and added that she didn't know they were young. She didn't change her posture or even look up. Park Min was furious. No one could be rude to him. He was the authority in the school. He snapped at Isuri and told her to watch her mouth. It sounded like a threat. Jeonwoo interrupted their quarrel. He said they didn't know about something. He spoke to the floor without looking up. The boys were surprised at Jeonwoo's sincerity. It seemed that the story of how he was saved was about to begin. Jeonwoo continued without looking up. He said they did not know how everyone else died. They didn't know anything, and they were small. He paused and added that they did not know how and at what cost Yeonwoo had survived. It seems that the guy himself could not believe that it was not a nightmare, and he really fought zombie monsters, saw his friends die, and almost did not burn in a fire. The two boys stood silently and looked at Yeonwoo. They didn't understand what he was getting at, and probably didn't really want to know about his adventures on the Namsan cable car. Jeonwoo sensed this and did not continue the conversation. He didn't want to trust the boys to set him up again. Instead, he asked what had happened to the boys, and if they had met any monsters. He raised his head at this point. His eyes looked quite alert at this point. Yeonwoo was no longer just a teenager. After everything he had been through in the past few days, Park Min's face hardly changed. He was very calm and cunning. Yeonwoo remembered that face. It was exactly how he had spoken to him when he had set him up with the soju. The guy had briefly said that he was just lucky. He added that it wasn't the first time he had been in trouble, as if this was an argument for Park Min's survival under strange circumstances. The guy put his hand on Yeonwoo's shoulder and asked him something to quickly change the conversation. He hugged his classmate, just like he did with Soja on the cable car. Jeonwoo looked at his hand. He didn't like it. Park Min continued to ask. He wanted to know who else was on the cable car besides those bastards. He did not have time to finish his question. He just looked into Yeonwoo's eyes for a few seconds, and the boy answered him in kind. There was a short pause. Eventually, the boys stood up and Park Min said it didn't matter. Yeonwoo realized that this trick was a distraction. His classmate's face was just as sly again, but the boy decided to play along and ask Park Min why he stopped. His classmate replied that it didn't matter anymore, and he added that he had been through a lot too. and it was hard for him. But at the same time, he had a smile on his face. While hugging Yeonwoo, Park Min noticed that the boy's arm was rewound. He decided to ask his classmate what had happened to him. He still had a smile on his face. He threw Yeonwoo off his game a bit with this question. The boy mumbled that it was a burn. Min supported him and said that he should have been more careful. Suddenly, the friend said that Yeonwoo's parents would be upset if they knew. He also asked if the boy had called them. Yeonwoo was stunned to realize that he hadn't really called his parents yet. He became animated and told Park Min that he really hadn't called his parents yet. But the officer never brought his phone back, so Yeonwoo asked to borrow a classmate's phone. The first thing he did was call his mom. He walked away from the company. This fake conversation was already in the middle of his throat. His mother immediately picked up the phone. She seemed to be waiting for his call and did not let go of the phone. She asked him excitedly if it was Yeonwoo, even though she recognized him from the first seconds, but she wanted to be sure. There was a lot of noise in the background. The rescuers in protective suits were telling Yeonwoo's father that if he didn't move away, they would have to use force. It seems that the parents wanted to go to the Namsan cable car. The mother nervously repeated her son's name twice, thinking that he couldn't hear because of the noise outside. She also wanted the father to hear and come and listen to his son. Yeonwoo said he had lost his phone somewhere and that it was his friend's number. As soon as the boy's mother heard her son's voice, she immediately cried. The father came over and began to calm her down. The mother was constantly apologizing to Yeonwoo. She continued that when the highway near Seoul was closed, they left the car and walked to Yeongjae-dong. But because the virus was spreading too fast, many areas of Seoul were blocked off. So my parents couldn't get into the city. And when there was no connection, her mother didn't sleep at all because of her worries and stress. That's why she burst into tears when she heard her son's voice. This conversation calmed her down a bit. Yeonwoo's father was also worried. He asked the boy if he was okay and got a positive answer. But the boy could not tell them about his arm. He did not fully understand what was under the bandage. The events moved to the first aid post. The room was not designed for a first aid post, but we had to come up with something for the apocalypse. The doctor sat in front of Yeonwoo and said that tissue necrosis had begun. He said it as if it was something bad. He was indignant that the burn was only on his arm, even though it was a third-degree burn. A doctor in a blue coat and mask asked Yeonwoo more questions. He was interested in how exactly the fire started in the cable car building. It was all quite strange. Yeonwoo was in no hurry to answer. First, he had to think over his words to make the lie sound believable. He didn't want to say that he started the fire, even if it was to save his life. Setting fire to a building was heavily punished. Yeonwoo decided to change the subject and leave the doctor's question rhetorical. He asked if his arm was okay, because the doctor's diagnosis was not clear to him. The doctor sensed the patient's somewhat anxious mood and said reassuringly that his arm would be fine, and it would be over in a day or two. They had treated such burns before. The doctor added that everything would soon get better, and that Yeonwoo should not worry.
I'll be going through everything you need to know about vehicles. This video will be split into 4 parts: vehicle controls and mechanics, how to actually secure a car, skill books and magazines you need to level up your mechanics, and a few nice mods that add a little spice to your quality of life in the game. Let's say it's getting late, you're down bad, and you're pretty far from your base. You can hold down V to bring up the menu wheel for additional options you have when you're in the car. Options do change depending on if you're in the front seat or the back seat. Right now we're in the back seat, but as I switch to the front, we have the options of hot wiring the car if I had the level, turning on my headlights, using my heater, enabling my horn. We're not going to do that since it will attract zombies. Opening up device options like your radio, closing the windows and opening them, locking all your doors, checking your mechanics, which will make you exit your car. And lastly, the most important thing is going to be sleeping in the car. Now jumping straight into the dashboard, we're going to move from right to left. First off, starting with the ignition. Sometimes the key can just be left in the engine, but definitely not something you want to do if you're playing online. And you can click to unlock your trunk, but this symbol will not show if you have a pickup truck. Control your heater or your AC, helpful if you're either playing during the winter or in the summer, if your character's conditions either are too hot or too cold. Your headlights, and then lastly to lock and unlock your doors. Now with the check engine light and the battery, both of these indicators are going to have some primary colors that show the state they're in. Green for working, if they were enabled, or red if they're broken, disabled, or need some maintenance. Your engine can be clicked to also start your car, in addition to using W. And finally, on the bottom left corner is going to be the option to use cruise control. Cruise control is used if you're going on a long drive. Just press Shift and W to cycle through the different speeds you want to drive at. Next helpful control is going to be holding down Z. This gives you the option to choose your seat or choose the door you'd like to exit from, which is also helpful for evading zombies and stepping out on the right side of the car. Even when you're standing outside the vehicle, both Z and V work as well. The same control could be used to access the menu options to attach trailers, cars, siphon gas, and put in gas. If you're ever having issues right-clicking and smashing the windows, go ahead and press V to pull up the same option. Just remember, even if you roll your windows down or break the window, you can still get bit by zombies through that access point. If you really have to break the window to pull up the same option. Just remember, even if you roll your windows down or break the window, you can still get bit by zombies through that access point. If you really have to break a window, be sure to do it from the passenger side. Q is your horn. That's definitely going to attract some zombies around you. Don't accidentally press it like I did. Then you might have some more problems you have to worry about. Similar to holding right click and then using your field of view, when you're in the car, you still have the same options. The field of view also plays into effect when you're going in reverse and when you're driving forward. To avoid taking critical damage to your car and stalling out, it's always going to be best to use the back of your car to ram zombies instead of using the hood. This could potentially damage your engine and cause you to stall. Lastly, most interesting tip to close out vehicle controls is that you can roll down your window, equip the weapon, and do a drive-by. Shoot zombies from your car and get away in style. There are going to be at least 5 different ways for finding keys to the car. 1. Catching them on the ground. 2. Finding them on a nearby zombie. 3. Searching nearby houses where the cars are present. 4. Checking the glove box or getting lucky with the keys in the ignition. And 5. Either picking up the burglar profession to hotwire or having electrical level 1 and mechanics level 2. If you're ever curious to know more about what cars are in the vanilla game by itself, you could always jump into the Project Zomboid wiki and sort cars by either their horsepower, trunk storage, seats and doors, and so on. I'm not going to go through this list, but feel free to check it out and so on. I'm not going to go through this list, but feel free to check it out, so on. I'm not going to go through this list, but feel free to check it out. And regardless, we're going to be adding a few mods in that are going to open up a whole new avenue of cars we can add in. Just know that more total storage means you can store more items like generators and so on, and horsepower equates to how fast you can go and how much you can tow. And engine loudness is always going to be a thing, since when your car is running, it will attract zombies. Before you even think about working on your car or building up your skill, you're going to want to make sure you pick up Mechanics Volume 1. If you do any work on your car without either reading this book or picking up the Fast Learner trait, you'll only gain 0.25 experience for every part removed. All you need is a screwdriver to uninstall and reinstall your lights, your battery, and your radio. To be most efficient with leveling up, it's going to be important to pick up the fast learner trait in addition to reading the book so you can collect those bonuses to level up your skill faster. If doing so, it'll take you 7 cars to get to level 1 and only 13 cars to get to level 2. Pause here and take a screenshot if you want to save this for later. You could always check your local bookstore, post office, or raid nearby homes for any books on mechanics in addition to others. So I jumped into debug mode just to go over the available magazines there are to read when it comes to picking up new skills with different cars, in addition to highlighting that there are in fact 5 skill books to get additional multipliers as you start to level up your skill. The standard manual lets you work on traditional cars, sedans. Performance lets you work on different types of sports cars that have the additional horsepower, and the commercial manual lets you work on vans and pickup trucks. And to close up this chapter, when it comes to changing your tire, pumping gas in your car, checking your hood, you have to be standing in the exact geometry to access that portion of the car. Sometimes it can be painful to figure out where to pump gas, or you can't get the right angle, but just know this is the geometry you have to fit into when it comes to either accessing different parts of your car. Before this video gets any longer, we're just going to jump into the workshop to take a look at a few of the mods used in this video. You could always filter by vehicles and see that there's never a shortage of mods you can add into your gameplay. First up, we got easily find the key. As mentioned before, this displays key in a 3D way, so this makes it way easier to find without you having to mess with your settings. Then we got the fuel side indicator. This conveniently shows the direction of where your fuel tank is located. Now we got better towing that adds a nice UI when it comes to towing cars, in addition to giving you the option to physically move your car or push it if it's stuck in a corner. Auto has plenty of different types of mods, but I've used the trailers one just to get access to a few more options. And we got I don't need a lighter, which lets you light cigarettes directly from your car's cigarette lighter. And when you pull up the menu wheel, it just shows you a few options, whether you have cigarettes on hand or if your battery is good enough to light one. Lastly, we have the Mustang mod from Auto that adds a few models in addition to a skill magazine to create some new parts. Then we have the classic 1985 Mercedes in addition to the Jeep Wrangler mod. And that wraps it up. This is the first installment in the series. Next up, I'll probably be going into player controls and
I felt that the doctor was talking not only about his arm, but about the situation in the country in general. It is not clear who he wanted to reassure. He finally said that all the trouble was over and Jong-woo could relax. He was in a quarantine zone. Outside the window, he could see a big pile of fire trucks and rescuers. Yeon-woo thought about the doctor's words that it was safe here, and that he should not worry or be concerned, because there were many soldiers in the room, and they were not in danger. The doctor began to complain to Yeon-woo in a worried manner. He said that the news said that there were many people who had sought shelter here, but there were many of Jeon-woo's friends. He criticized that the government was calling on citizens to die, adding that they were behaving like rats. Suddenly the doctor came to his senses and realized that he had said too much. He apologized to Yeon-woo, saying that friends said that Yeon-woo's parents would be upset if they knew. He also asked if the boy had called them. Jeon-woo was stunned to realize that he hadn't really called his parents yet. He became animated and told Park Min that he really hadn't called his parents yet. But the officer never brought his phone back, so Yeon-woo asked to borrow a classmate's phone. The first thing he did was call his mom. He walked away from the company. This fake conversation was already in the middle of his throat. His mother immediately picked up the phone. She seemed to be waiting for his call and did not let go of the phone. She asked him excitedly if it was Jeon-woo, even though she recognized him from the first seconds, but she wanted to be sure. There was a lot of noise in the background. The rescuers in protective suits were telling Yeon-woo's father that if he didn't move away, they would have to use force. It seems that the parents wanted to go to the Namsan cable car. The mother nervously repeated her son's name twice, thinking that he couldn't hear because of the noise outside. She also wanted the father to hear and come to listen to his son. Jongwoo said he had lost his phone somewhere and that it was his friend's number. As soon as the boy's mother heard her son's voice, she immediately cried. The father came over and began to calm her down. The mother was constantly apologizing to Jongwoo. She continued that when the highway near Seoul was closed, they left the car and walked to Yeongjae-dong. But because the virus was spreading too fast, many areas of Seoul were blocked off. So my parents couldn't get into the city. And when there was no connection, her mother didn't sleep at all because of her worries and stress. That's why she burst into tears when she heard her son's voice. This conversation calmed her down a bit. Jongwoo's father was also worried. He asked the boy if he was okay and got a positive answer. But the boy could not tell them about his arm. He did not fully understand what was under the bandage. The events moved to the first aid post. The room was not designed for a first aid post, but we had to come up with something for the apocalypse. The doctor sat in front of Jongwoo and said that tissue necrosis had begun. He said it as if it was something bad. He was indignant that the burn was only on his arm, even though it was a third-degree burn. A doctor in a blue coat and mask asked Yeonva more questions. He was interested in how exactly the fire started in the cable car building. It was all quite strange. Jongwoo was in no hurry to answer. First, he had to think over his words to make the lie sound believable. He didn't want to say that he started the fire, even if it was to save his life. Setting fire to a building was heavily punished. Jongwoo decided to change the subject and leave the doctor's question rhetorical. He asked if his arm was okay, because the doctor's diagnosis was not clear to him. The doctor sensed the patient's somewhat anxious mood and said reassuringly that his arm would be fine, and it would be over in a day or two. They had treated such burns before. The doctor added that everything would soon get better, and that Jongwoo should not worry. I felt that the doctor was talking not only about his arm, but about the situation in the country in general. It is not clear who he wanted to reassure. He finally said that all the trouble was over and Jongwoo could relax. He was in a quarantine zone. Outside the window, he could see a big pile of fire trucks and rescuers. Jongwoo thought about the doctor's words that it was safe here, and that he should not worry or be concerned, because there were many soldiers in the room, and they were not in danger. The doctor began to complain to Jongwoo in a worried manner. He said that the news said that there were many people who had sought shelter here, but there were many of Jongwoo's friends. He criticized that the government was calling on citizens to die, adding that they were behaving like rats. Suddenly, the doctor came to his senses and realized that he had said too much. He apologized to Jongwoo, saying that it was all just a joke and offered to end the conversation. As Jongwoo was leaving, the doctor told him to hold on anyway. He added that the patient would soon return home, and it was safe here. The doctor told Jongwoo once again not to worry, but the boy had already realized that the whole speech was not addressed to him, but to the doctor himself. He came out, bowed, and the nurses in blue coats called for the next patient. Jongwoo walked down the hall and looked at his hand. He looked at it for an indecently long time. If someone saw him, they would think something was wrong. He looked at her and thought that he had survived. He still could not believe it. His hand was a memento and a constant reminder of the nightmare he had experienced. Jongwoo thought about how he had risked his life but managed to survive. But suddenly his thoughts turned from heroic to anger and even rage. He asked himself the same question all the time. Why did his classmates do this to him? He didn't care about the others, but she did. Jongwoo was thinking about So Young. He knew that the girl had understood him correctly, but she hadn't helped the boy. He could have died. The young man survived not because of her, but in spite of her. The events moved back to the cafe where the rest of the class was hiding. At the table were Kang Min, Seo Young, and two new classmates who had recently joined. Even though the company was talking about something, the girl was absorbed in her thoughts. Kang Min and Kim Min Ju were discussing the path on the map to Seoul Station. The boy found the way between Myeongdong Station and the train station. Meanwhile, Soyeon sat on her phone and thought. She didn't even blink. It turned out that she was looking at a locked phone. Its screen was so black that even the girl's reflection was visible. Soyeon looked like a zombie from an American movie. Meanwhile, the events are returning to the hideout again. Yeonwoo was returning from the doctor's office to the hall where the crowd was gathered. He was watched by Asuri, who noticed that he was staring at his hand and was very interested in why. Please support the channel, like and subscribe for new episode. Suddenly, the events moved to an apartment. There were traces of a zombie monster on the window, and no one was visible inside the room. Things were in their places, as if people had just been going about their business when they had to flee. The family hugged each other as if it were the last time. The mother clutched her son tightly to her chest so that she could not hear him crying so much. It seems that the family was hiding from the monster, but they failed and said goodbye, spending the last moments of their lives in love. Outside the window, they could see a whole army of zombie monsters. They were crawling either upstairs. Better, and that Jeonwoo should not worry. In the said that thought about plenty crit anyway. The doctor told Yeonwoo once again not to worry, but the boy had already realized that the whole speech was not addressed to him, but to the doctor his patiently long time and a constant reminder. His life and leave the doctor's diet safe here. And there were citizens who would leave home after himself. He came out, bowed, and the nurses in blue coats called for the next patient. Jeonwoo walked down the hall and looked at his hand. He looked at it for an indecently long time. If someone saw him, they would think something was wrong. He looked at her and thought that he had survived. Reminder of to survive. He asked himself, he didn't care that the girl Kang was Myung. She didn't mean was a zombie. He was watched by the window. People were the last him crying so much. The madness when they had to flee. The family hugged each so that she kissed her. Love. Outside the window, or in afraid, alive. She must have seen or heard and looked directly at the family. Yes, giants moved to a situation. He said that at the time of filming, the capital of South Korea, Seoul, was facing the most serious surprise in the history of emergencies. After all, a virus unknown to the population had dealt a colossal blow to the country. However, the state is mobilizing all available and possible forces and resources to support isolationist events. They are also confident that after 3 weeks of quarantine, the cleanup of Seoul will be complete. The screen showed videos of special people burning all the monsters and their slime in the city. Among them could be infected people who have not yet had time to transform. It turned out that a classmate was watching the whole thing in a cafe. The president also added that this is all for the safety of citizens and the country as a whole. He went on to say that the infected areas are categorized by impact level from 1 to 4, with 4 being the highest degree of infection. The government also took care of unfounded rumors that frightened citizens and created additional panic in the country. Meanwhile, my classmate began typing something quickly on the keyboard of her laptop. The president sincerely called on all the listeners to cooperate. It turned out that the same table with the teenagers was watching the news, and the whole cafe was watching the news. The live broadcast went on to say that she asked citizens who were in the danger zones to refrain from risky, rash actions that would have consequences. The president's last words were that he recommended that everyone who was at the epicenter of the events go to the nearest shelter. Meanwhile, Hannah listened to the news and could hardly stop herself from falling asleep. Over the next few days, The teenagers did not manage to sleep. Suddenly, the woman who let the teenagers in, who turned out to be the owner of the cafe, was carrying a drink to someone and told him to drink it. She scolded a man and put a can of Coke on his table. The woman asked him how long he was going to behave like this. The man simply thanked her for the drink. The cafe owner noticed that she was being stared at and turned to the perpetrators. She turned to the teenagers and asked if they wanted anything. The classmates were silent in a stupor. They did not expect the woman to talk to them. She brought the teenagers different sodas. They thanked her and started drinking quickly. The classmates had hardly eaten anything in those few days. The woman allowed the other teenagers who were not sitting at the table to take something from the refrigerator with drinks. The class was happy about this and sincerely thanked the kind woman. Suddenly, the cafe owner asked if the children were on a school trip. They answered yes, and the woman asked where the rest of the class was. But the owner did not wait for an answer and commented on the words of some old man, saying that he was talking nonsense again. She commented on her visitors further, saying that a man was talking loudly and emotionally on the phone, that he was always talking only about problems with his girlfriend. It turned out that he was a bus driver. The owner of the cafe left the teenagers to scold the man with the phone to be quieter. The woman was kind, but a little grumpy. Meanwhile, Kong Ming shared with his classmates that he had installed a mobile app that reported emergencies. He added that the program showed that the area where the teenagers were located was in the second of the 4 levels of danger that the president had talked about. Only Kong Min and Kim Min-ju were really included in the conversation. The girl asked where the 3rd and 4th levels of danger were. Soyeon stared at the wall with a glassy gaze, floating somewhere in the clouds. Suddenly, her classmates who were sitting at the table with her began to call out to her. They noticed that she was not engaged in the conversation, as if her head was full of other serious things. The classmate called Soyeon again, and louder, which scared the girl quite a bit. She screamed, but returned to the real world, where a dangerous virus reigns and they have to save their lives. Kim Min-ju asked if Seo-young had heard what Kang Min had said. She added that they were in a 2nd-level security area. The girl didn't really know what to do with this information or how to react, so she just smiled a little in response. She seemed to find the information comforting. Kang Min asked Kim Min-ju if it would be better for them to go to Seoul Station. The girl countered with a question about whether the news had said anything about it, and whether it would be better for them to wait here in the cafe. He replied that it was just words. He asked when she thought they would come to rescue them. Kim Min-ju started to say that the news had said so, but she was interrupted. It was Ji-sun. She was lying with her head on the table, holding her phone. She told her classmates that she could not reach her parents. She sounded sad and scared, worried about what might have happened to her parents. Kim Min-ju quickly began to support her friend, saying that everything would be fine. It was just that there was no connection. Ji-sun said she hoped her parents were okay. Meanwhile, Soyeon was still holding the phone in her hands and staring at it. It was as if she couldn't decide to do anything. Her heart started beating faster, and her blood pressure rose. She was breathing loudly and still looking at her phone. Suddenly, she abruptly put the phone down on the table with the screen facing up. So-young had been wanting to call Yeonwoo all along to see if he was okay, but she couldn't. She didn't have the courage. She looked at Kang Min and Kim Min-jae and thought that Yeonwoo probably wouldn't have taken her call. He probably hated her. So-yeon was feeling very heavy at heart. After all, Jeonwoo had saved her more than once. She hated herself a lot for not doing anything, and they left Jeonwoo. So-young thought that Yeonwoo could be dead by now and cried. But even if her classmate had survived, she was still the only one who had abandoned him. Meanwhile, blogger Honmi decided to broadcast live for her channel. She greeted her subscribers and happily began to talk about the latest news from her life. Kang Min explained to Mingju that Honmi had created a survivor's blog yesterday, and her viewership had skyrocketed. Her followers wrote words of support in the live chat and asked how she survived the bus. Honmi said that the audience guessed where the girl was now. She had a smile on her face. She could professionally put her real emotions on the back burner when the camera was on. Someone in the chat room started writing that they had seen the menu. And after that, there was speculation that the girl was in a restaurant or cafe with her class. Honmi confirmed her viewers' guesses and said that the owner of the restaurant had saved them. and that she was the reason they survived. She then pointed the camera at the next table. There was a bus driver and a serious man holding his head with his hands. The blogger said that these two also survived. Someone from the live stream asked if Hanmi could say hello to them, and the girl replied that it was impossible because the atmosphere in the establishment was not good. The man behind her covered his arms even more. Meanwhile, Hanmi thanked him for the 10,000 won donation. The man looked at the blogger. He seemed to be very annoyed by what was happening. He didn't look very friendly himself. You could see a ring on his hand. The subscribers noticed the headman Kang Ji-hoon. He was looking out the window. The viewers asked Hanmi to send him greetings. She asked Ji-hoon to look at the camera and said that if he made a heart with his hands, she would get another 10,000 won, to which the friendly Starosta pointed his middle finger at the camera. This gesture angered Hanmi, because she could have been banned from the live broadcast for doing so, and she valued her channel and reputation. An old woman who owned a restaurant walked by the blogger's girlfriend. Unfortunately for her, Hanmi noticed the woman and wanted to film her for her channel to show her subscribers her savior. She started pestering my grandmother to do an interview with her, but the woman didn't even know the word. She was just trying to do her job. Eventually, Hanmi filmed the restaurant owner for her blog. The girl began to tell her that she had saved them and asked her grandmother to say hello to her subscribers. She said hello, but didn't understand who she was talking to. Hanmi began to rush her grandmother a bit and asked her to introduce herself, as her classmates had done during the tour. The restaurant owner told her that she couldn't do that. Hanmi kept up with her. Suddenly, someone called out to her in a not-so-friendly voice. Hanmi turned toward the sound. That was the serious man who had his hands over his face. Now he was sitting openly and said rudely that Hanmi should immediately turn off her live broadcast and swore. He added that they were not here for fun and games. The man's tone was quite serious, but Hanmi reacted in her own way. She said on camera that there was something wrong with this man. She was outraged that he was telling the girl what to do. She mocked the man, but he could not stand this attitude. He began to get up from the table and call the girl in an even ruder and more serious tone. He made a lot of noise and sounds as he got up from the table, which attracted the attention of the other diners. Everyone turned around and watched what was happening. He came closer. It scared her. Didn't this man know about personal boundaries? He asked her in a rude tone if she didn't understand what he was saying. His face was as relaxed as possible, and his voice was very dictatorial, as if he was speaking to his subordinate from his mouth. The man added that when he asked Hanmi to stop doing something, he had to fulfill his request, or rather an order. But the girl was silent. She just looked at the man with wide eyes. It seems that this silence irritated him. He switched to mouth. The man was very hot-tempered. This scared Hanmi even more. All she could say was a scream. Her eyes widened even more as she stood in a stupor looking into the man's evil eyes. Suddenly, someone appeared in front of the girl and began to cover her with his hands, pulling her away. This shocked the man, because it was his conversation with Hanmi, and no one was supposed to interfere between them. He clearly did not like this course of events. It turned out that it was the headmaster, Kang Ji-hoon. Surprisingly, he behaved like a true gentleman and the head of the class, defending his classmate. He looked the man in the eye and asked Hanmi what had happened here. Ji-hoon did not speak to the man. Hanmi began to complain that the man had threatened her. The man replied in a sweary tone that this had not happened, and that he was just asking that the girl turn off the broadcast. To which the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, said that they would turn it off. His answer was exhaustive. He continued that he would turn off the broadcast himself, and that the man had nothing to worry about. Hanmi, on the other hand, had already completely hid behind the elder Ji-hoon. The man responded to the boy's boldness by saying that they were just stupid, ill-mannered children. However, the man's tone and expression changed and became calmer. He realized that he was no longer facing a defenseless girl who could be attacked. Suddenly, the grandmother, the owner of the restaurant, intervened in their fight. She was screaming and swinging at the man, asking what was wrong with him and why he was taking it out on these innocent children. The man sincerely did not understand what was wrong. He asked why he should be polite to such rude children as these, and why the restaurant owner was defending these teenagers. The woman began to lead her husband away from his classmates to the table where he was sitting. A frightened Kim Minju ran to Hunmi and asked if her friend was okay. From behind the headman, Kang Ji-hoon, Hunmi was shouting with tears in her eyes. She asked why this man was so aggressive toward her. Instead, Ji-hoon was not polite to her, even though she had just been yelled at. He abruptly snatched the live selfie stick from the blogger's hands and ordered her to turn it off. He scolded Hunmi for doing this, even though everyone was already on edge. He looked at his classmate. Hunmi was silent when she suddenly began to make the sound of crying. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She was uncomfortable with everyone yelling at her. Hunmi began to cry bitterly, wiping her tears with her